As usual, a lot is going on in the world, and of course, we're going to talk about that, and we're going to see if some of our guests come in or not. But always some amazing conversations here on the World Edition, and of course, I know that Chris Greco will be glad to know about the first story that I'm going to bring up and everything, because apparently the U.S. airports are rumbling back to life after an FAA computer outage. That's right; those lovely computers got in the way again, and it definitely caused all kinds of flight delays, cancellations, and all kinds of things right here in the United States of America. So definitely the FAA experienced some sort of computer outage, and that caused all kinds of problems. And of course, we also know that there are California storms. That's right, there was a flash flood warning in San Francisco after Montecito and Santa Barbara evacuations. And of course, we've got that whole story around the Biden classified documents issue. And of course, that's adding to the House Republicans' growing list of investigations that are taking place. And for those of you that are into the stock market, it looks like the stocks are rising as investors are awaiting inflation data, and NASDAQ is going to attempt a 4-day winning streak. So that would be a wonderful thing as well. And apparently, mortgage refinance demands are surging as homeowners are taking advantage of lower interest rates. So that's some of the things that I am seeing. And of course, Biden was also challenged by Mexico president on his forgetfulness during his North American tour. So, it's not a good thing when your president is called out by another leader of another country, particularly one to the south of the border. So that is some of the things that I am seeing. Also, Illinois became the latest U.S. state to ban assault rifles. And that is some of the news. I'm sure that there'll be other news items that we'll get to as well. And we'll see what's happening in the side of the world of politics. And it looks like at least 6 were injured in an attack at a central Paris railway station. So that is one of the things that we're seeing. And inquiries were launched into Peru president's situation, and there are curfews in that rest of region. So that is something that we're seeing on the world stage, and definitely it looks like those Brazil protests are still going on, and there are a number of other things that are happening. Of course, we do know that that war between Ukraine and Russia is still taking place. And of course, a lot of folks are paying attention to Prince Harry's memoir, Spare. Apparently, that comes from a hare and a spare, and that hit the shelves. And apparently, it's already flying off the shelves in that way. And by the way, Ukraine will be glad to know that the German minister has promised Ukraine weapons and EU accession help on a surprise trip. So he made a surprise trip, and he definitely had that good news in that sense. One of the other things that I'm going to bring up to the panel and see what they've got to say about this is the notion that apparently the House Republicans have went after a sacred cow, and they're saying that the White House will not uh, follow through, even if they vote for it and all in that way. And they're definitely saying that the other element of Congress will not go for it either. But when I say that they're going after a sacred cow, apparently they're going after the IRS. That's right. They're saying that they want to slash some of the IRS's funds and all in that space. And just on a sadder note, ex-king Constantine II of Greece has passed away at the age of 82. So that's some of the things that we're seeing in the world and all in that space. But we do have a activist that is going to be talking about a lot of things, and I'm glad that she has joined us. We're going to see if another one of our folks comes on as well. But we do have a young lady that'll be appearing at North Carolina very soon to talk about some of her work and definitely the great things that she is doing in that community. So I'm going to bring up Medea Benjamin and have a conversation with her, and then we'll bring in our other folks as well. Medea, glad that you were able to join us and everything. I know that you are definitely doing a lot of great work in that space of peace activism. And of course, definitely a lot of folks are doing things this week to honor Dr. King. You're actually coming at us from California, if I remember correctly, but I know that a lot is happening in the world, and you're going to be coming to North Carolina to speak in kind of like his honor, his legacy, and things along those lines. But for those that don't know you from around the world, because this is a world network and all in that space, I would love to have you share a little bit about your story and what you are all about.
Good morning, Mark. Thanks for having me on. I'm a peace activist. You called me a young lady, which is very nice, but I go back to the days of the Vietnam War. And I have always taken to heart Martin Luther King's words about a country that spends more on militarism than social uplift is destroying its own soul. And I see that happening in my own country, where we're spending now, Mark, close to $1 trillion on the military. And meanwhile, as the young people of this country and around the world know, they feel the real existential crisis is the climate, and that we need to take billions and billions of dollars from that and put it into dealing with the climate. So I've been a peace activist for all of my life. And here we are in the midst of another war, this time not one that the US has started. It's one that Russia has started with its assault on February 24th of last year, but nevertheless one that has to be ended. So I'm anxious to come to your area and talk to people about what are the possible solutions.
If you could just tell us a little bit about the group that you put together called Code Pink. I know it's a women-led peace group, and I also know that you founded the human rights group Global Exchange. So I'd love to know more about how those groups came about, and if you could share a little bit of their history. And also, I would love to hear about your run back in 2000 when you ran for U.S. Senate in the Green Party ticket. But for right now, if you can definitely just share a little bit about those two organizations.
Well, I ran against Dianne Feinstein. It looks like finally she might not be running again. She is in her late 80s, and certainly time for some new leadership there in California. But I've been living in Washington, D.C. for the last 15 years because, let's face it, this is where the people who have the most power over our foreign policy reside. And Global Exchange is an organization that still goes on, and I'm very proud of. It works now a lot on Latin America. You know, Biden has just been in Latin America, as you said in your newscast, and met with the head of Mexico, who has been trying to change U.S. policy, as have many of us here, to one that's a good neighbor policy of mutual respect instead of one of domination. And then the other group is Code Pink, which started after the 9/11 attacks, saying we have to bring those who attacked us to justice as a crime against humanity, but not use it as a reason to invade and occupy other countries. We oppose the invasion and occupation of Afghanistan that lasted for 20 years and then left the people miserable in the hands of the Taliban once again. And we oppose the invasion of Iraq that has just been disastrous for that country. And I must say that the leadership in Iraq right now, after all the blood and resources that we invested there, is a government that is pro-Iranian. So our military efforts have not given us good results, on the contrary. And so, yes, that's a little bit of the background of those two organizations.
It sounds good. One of the other things I was curious about, and then I'll definitely bring in some of the other normal folks that are on the show, our normal panelists and everything. But a lot of times there is a notion that progressives all get along and that we are always on the same page. But I know for a fact that I want to say it was last year that you actually shouted out at the former president, Barack Obama. So it sounds like there can be even differences within the progressive side of politics, for lack of a better term. And we do know that there can be disagreements even on the other side of politics as well. We saw some of that with the efforts to get a House Speaker, which then came in with Kevin McCarthy getting that job and everything. But I was just wondering your thoughts around divisions that can take place even within the same ideologies and things along those lines.
Well, I ran as a Green Party, and now I'm an independent, so I don't really identify with a political party because I think our two-party system is not expressive enough, expansive enough for different views, like the real anti-war view. And so, yes, I had interrupted Barack Obama to talk about his keeping Guantanamo open. And actually right now, today is one of the grim anniversaries of the opening of Guantanamo many years ago. And I also talked to him about the use of drones that have been killing civilians, because I had just come back from Pakistan and Yemen, meeting with a lot of the families whose loved ones had been killed by our drone warfare. So yes, there's lots of divisions, and certainly around Ukraine. You announced in your news part how it was good that Germany was now giving more weapons to Ukraine. Well, this is a good example of divisions, because I feel we have to stop the flow of weapons and push for negotiations, while there are many people in the Democrat and Republican parties who feel that we have to keep funding Ukraine, and that there is a possibility of, quote, winning the war on the battlefield. I, along with people who really know about war, like people in the Pentagon, think there is no winning on the battlefield, that we have to really push for a ceasefire and negotiations.
Do you think, and this is just one question I was curious about. I've told Shaquille that I am a fan of a certain song that talked about there being no war and everything, that being John Lennon's Imagine and all in that kind of line. He sometimes gives me a hard time for being a fan of that particular song and all. But I was just wondering, with so many wars going on in the world, whether it's in Ukraine, whether it's in areas of Africa, like I know that there's stuff going on still in Eritrea and Ethiopia, maybe even around Nigeria and a number of other places throughout the world and everything. Is this kind of like tilting at windmills? Can we ever have peace on earth, that Dr. King was talking about and that others wanted as well? So I'm just wondering, is this something that is even achievable in our lifetime?
Well, maybe not in our lifetime, but it's achievable and it's necessary, because now there's the possibility of nuclear annihilation. And we have to recognize those two existential threats to our planet, the climate and nuclear war, and do something about both of them. So I think that as we evolve as a civilization, part of that evolution has to be that we stop this insanity of militarism, of resolving conflicts through war. You know, we teach our kids to not hit each other, to not bully each other, to find peaceful ways to resolve conflicts in the playground. We should be doing the same thing as adults. And I think Martin Luther King, it would be a great tribute to him if we started reducing our military, investing in the climate, and dealing with the triple evils he talked about: racism, poverty, and militarism.
What do you think Dr. King's thoughts would be around today's politics? Do you think that he would be a member or supporter of things like Black Lives Matter and some of the other things that exist? I mean, I know that that's only speculation, because the man has definitely been passed many decades ago and all in that space. But I was just wondering, what do you think he would be doing if he was living in this particular time that we exist in?
Well, as a white woman, it would be very pretentious of me to say what Martin Luther King would be doing, but I can say that the followers of Martin Luther King, like the Reverend Barber of the Poor People's Campaign, have been not only speaking out in favor of the efforts of the people on the street, mostly young people, trying to change the way the policing is done in this country, but also has come out recently for a ceasefire and negotiations in the case of the conflict in Ukraine. In fact, we had over 1,500 faith-based leaders in the United States calling for a Christmas truce. And I would, were he with us, would be at the top of that list.
Yep. If you could tell us a little bit about the book that you just put out. And like I said, I'm going to bring in some of our other folks, including Chris Greco and Shaquille Latimer and others that are on the panel. But I just want to give folks a sense of what you are about. And also, if you could tell us where you'll be appearing in this area, meaning the area of the Triangle of North Carolina. But definitely, if you could share a little bit about the title of the book and what the book is all about.
Yes. Well, the book is called War in Ukraine: Making Sense of a Senseless Conflict. And it is a very, it's thorough but brief. It's a primer. It's meant to give people who are busy but very confused about where this conflict came from a sense of the context of it. We have a chapter, well, several chapters that look at the evolution of the conflict from the time of 2014, where there was an uprising against the pro-Russian government. We talk about the involvement of the US and NATO, and have a chapter that really looks at what is NATO all about. We have a chapter called Flirting with Nuclear Weapons because we feel that this is extremely dangerous when you have the US and Russia basically in a proxy war where the two of them have over 90% of the world's nuclear weapons. And we point to where the solutions could lie. And in terms of where I will be, I'm really excited because this is part of a 50-city tour that I've been doing around the country, trying to get people involved in conversations about this issue, hopefully convince them that we have to pressure our elected leaders for negotiations and get some movement going in local communities. So I will be on Monday, January 16th, in Chapel Hill at the Community Church of Chapel Hill for an evening event there. I will be at UNC Greensboro on the 17th. I will be doing several events in Asheville, and all of this is on the calendar of codepink.org under the Ukraine book tour.
Sounds good. Just really quickly, and then like I promised, I'm going to bring in Chris Greco as well as Shaquille Latimer. But you had also mentioned that to some degree the importance of the fight, not just with Ukraine, but also the war on poverty. And we know a lot of people are surprised how many folks are living in poverty in the United States. And you also kind of briefly talked about being a member of the Green Party and the issue around climate change. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts around both of those issues. And then I'll open the floor to some of my other esteemed panelists as well. And I'll bring in Lee Newton Rhodes as well as Dan Worthington and others that are here as well. I believe we've even got Sasha Starr, who's been very much involved in the war on Ukraine and all in that space. But I'd love to hear your thoughts around poverty and around climate change before we get to questions from my other panelists.
Well, let me put them both in together with their links to militarism, because I think when you have a country that is spending so much of its funds on the military, that then you don't have money to address issues like poverty, and you don't have funds to deal with the climate issue. You know, there is always this great debate about, do we have the money for a green to give college students a chance to wipe out their debt and move forward without that kind of indentured servitude? Do we have the money to give a basic safety net to the people in this country? And there is always great debate about that, and usually those things lose out. But yet there is never a question about where is the money coming from for the military. In the case of Ukraine, in less than a year, we spent over $100 billion. Imagine what that could have gone for in terms of dealing with the homelessness crisis in this country, or dealing with the problem of people who still don't have decent access to healthcare. And yet we have been able to send that money many thousands of miles overseas to a conflict that most people in this country know very little about. So I think they are connected, and that's why celebrating Martin Luther King and his call for the U.S. to stop being such a purveyor of violence, whether it's violence at home or violence overseas, is a call that we should heed today.
Definitely open the floor up to others, Chris and Shaquille, and anybody else, Dan Worthington and Sasha, if you have any questions or anything. And well, I think
before we get started on that, I have on my share screen, I have some interesting stuff. Ms. Benjamin, I have your website. You can go to codepink.org and see there's your smiling face right there. And I didn't realize, I mean, you mentioned it, but other areas that you're involved with. So I just think that it's a really good website. I read through it. It's got some very interesting stuff in here. Also, go to Amazon.com. You get your book, War in Ukraine, Making Sense of a Senseless Conflict, which is interesting because I guess not that I have an extreme problem with the title, but is there a sensible conflict? I guess, when we talk about this, senseless gun violence, senseless, it's like there is no sensible war. There is no sensible conflict. But I understand where that phrase, senseless conflict, actually gets people, it gets them into what the story is about. So I get it, and it's not bad. I'm thinking I got a Kindle with about 160 books on this thing, so I think I might just go and do that. So, anyways, that's it with that, and I wanted to just to point out that. So and I'm really happy that you're on the air. I would like to make a couple comments about MLK though. MLK was very much against the Vietnam War. I get it. He was against that until he was almost labeled a communist in 1965, and then he kind of tempered his criticism of the Vietnam War. And the reason he did that was twofold. One was he didn't want to be labeled a communist, number one, because he hated communism. He did not like communism. He thought that was the death of the Civil Rights Act and everything else that was going on. And number two was Lyndon Johnson, who helped to get the Civil Rights Act passed, which was interesting because if it weren't, again, throughout my Republican thing, if it weren't for the Republicans, the Civil Rights Act wouldn't have been passed, but that's another story. But basically, he didn't want to mess up on Johnson, so he kind of backed down. Now, Coretta Scott King, to her credit, went full bore and went absolutely against the Vietnam War, and was carried that baton throughout the situation, upwards and after Martin Luther King's death. So I mean that's a very good point you bring about Martin Luther King. So interestingly enough, but idea behind $800 billion, and it's interesting, $800 billion. I mean, we pay, and we went through this, Nick, on the economic show, is that we don't have enough money to pay for Medicare Part A, and we're not going to have enough money to pay for Social Security come 2030. But by God, we got enough money, $800 billion, to pay for this, to pay for replenishing weapons that we are now, we're $1.2 billion. We're going to pay for. Yeah, you're right, Dan. It is different buckets. Dan wrote that. Yeah, it's mandatory versus discretionary spending. I get it. So basically, what happens is that you're going to be spending more and more and more money. And the military-industrial complex here, I used to be a government contractor. They're going to take your money. Canada just bought 88 F-35 fighters. Good for them. They're not going to be active until 2029. Then they buy a bunch of surface-to-air missile or air defense, and guess what they do with them? They give them to Ukraine. The Canadian public is like going, what the hell? You just gave, you bought them from the U.S., which incidentally was made by Raytheon, which also helps make the F-35 interesting. So they may have gotten a break on the F-35 by buying these air defense things, and then they give them to Ukraine, right? They don't even take them into the country. They just give them right to Ukraine. So I'm sitting back going, there's so many billions of dollars going into Ukraine right now, and I get it. You got to fight off the Russians, and also Medea. I get it. You're going with the background, and Sasha really has a good historical background on this whole situation. But I'm going to tell you something. Nobody except for Sasha understands Eastern Europeans. Eastern Europeans hold grudges for centuries, sometimes millennia. I mean, the French and British still talk about the 7 Years' War. I mean, there are set mental capacities that cannot change and will not change. And if peace, if you ask a Ukrainian right now, do you want peace? And they go, yes, we want peace. Do you want peace with the Russians? We will never have peace with those pigs. I mean, that's a quote from a Serbian and a Kosovar back in the 1990s.
Chris, maybe we should hear from Sasha because he is from Ukraine.
Yeah.
He's from Odessa, as opposed to listening to the American views. So let's hear from Sasha Starr.
Thank you, Nick. Have anybody heard yesterday a speech of Vladimir Zelensky during the Golden Globe Award? So I'm the only one who heard that. I'm the only one who was watching Golden Globe. Okay, that's fine. There was a standing ovation to his speech primarily because what he is explaining is that Ukraine is fighting the free world battle against expansionist Russia. And when there's talk about senseless war, it is not senseless war for Mr. Putin. That's for him, Ukraine is just a starting point from where he would go farther to Moldova and Baltic states and Poland and so on and on and on. And why China is infuriated now with Mr. Putin is that he failed to deliver the stage number 1 of the plan. So China was ready to close its eyes, okay, do whatever, because Putin's plan was to take over Kyiv in 3 days. In 6 days, 7 days, all Ukraine. He miserably failed, and right now his forces are taking a huge beating at the Ukrainians, who are heroically fight superior Russian forces, although no longer superior, because on estimates about 300,000 Russian people are either dead or maimed and out of service. 300,000 in less than a year. It's a number. It's definitely a number, and the number will grow. And right now, with all these futile attempts to take over the Bakhmut and Solidar, Russians are losing 600-700 people a day. That's nice math. And so from Mr. Putin, and of course, because he's largely supported by Russian people, it's not a senseless war at all. It's a war for its dominance in the Europe and, of course, the world as well. And Ukraine is fighting this war. And by the way, somebody was comment on Golden Globe was that if there would be Zelensky would be eligible for election in US in 2024, he would easily beat either Biden or Trump or whoever other clowns there is to beat.
But for what reason, Sasha? Like, I'm not trying to take away from what's happened in the Ukraine, but just because he happens to be the leader at the time this happens, doesn't mean that all of a sudden he's imbued with this incredible knowledge of politics and world leadership. I mean, the whole world is just rallying behind him, and I understand why, and I agree that the world should rally behind the Ukraine, but we shouldn't deify the leader of that country as if he can do no wrong, as if there's
no. I'm so sorry, Shakil. I must mention one more thing. Why U.S. has all obligation, and let's start with the moral obligation. U.S. failed to take over the Russian nuclear armament back in 1992, right after the fallout of Soviet Union. U.S. failed to do that. Back in 1994, with Budapest Memorandum, U.S. actually cheated on Ukraine, telling them, oh, you'll be okay, we will guarantee, just give all your arms and missiles and warplanes to Russia and we will take care of you. Today, Ukraine is being bombarded with the same missiles that it gave back to Russia in 1994.
Sasha, I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you. That doesn't mean, therefore, that we should deify the current leader of the Ukraine because of the things that have happened in the past. And
no,
by the way,
there are consequences.
When we talk,
there are consequences when you are promising to the countries and to the world.
I agree. That's not the point that I made, Sasha.
Just go and deliver.
That's not the point that I made. I agree with you.
Shakil, it's a payback time now.
Yeah,
it's
Shakil,
payback
time.
Shakil and Sasha, hold on. We have another guest as well, so I definitely want to get to the other guests as well in that space, and definitely we can continue this conversation. But we've also got George Amana on that and I'm sorry if I mispronounced the name and all along those lines, but definitely she is Georgia, that is Georgia Yamana, who has written a book called Terriers in the Jungle. I know she was doing a lot of work. We were actually earlier talking to Medea around climate change and things of that nature, but she's actually written a book, I believe, is partially based on her own travels in Africa, that is talking about some of the things that are going on our planet with the elephants and all in that space. But I will let Georgia tell us a little bit about what she's got going on and her role in what some people would consider animal activism and all in that space. So Miss Amana, if you would share a little bit, like we let Medea do, about your book and what you've got going on and all in that space.
Oh, thank you. Hi, nice to be here. Thanks for the invitation. Yes, my novel Terriers in the Jungle came out last year, and I've been very lucky because it's won 8 awards, national and international, and it's based on a true story of I've been a big animal advocate for about 20 years, and especially elephants, and helped work to get Billy the elephant out of the zoo in Los Angeles, and also helped to lead many marches. And also as a journalist, I had gone to Kenya many times and interviewed conservationists. So I moved to Kenya 2018 to see what else I could learn and do to help elephants. And I brought my family with me, which included my 2 small dogs. And so I learned a lot when I was there, and excuse me, my dogs learned a lot. So the book is actually told by the dogs. So it's a story told by the dogs. So that makes it kind of not a children's story, but a story you could share with children. But it's what I learned when I was there, especially, is I was working with some girls, very rural girls, very poor, and they had been assaulted and they had babies and they never go back to school. And I found out that's a common problem there. And in Kenya, it's really one of the best countries in Africa as far as saving wildlife. They have many conservation programs there. They do not allow trophy hunting, which most of the countries do, unfortunately. And but one of their problems with elephants and other wildlife is what they call human wildlife conflict. And that's where there's a population explosion in Africa, and people are building on all the ancient migratory routes of the animals. So they build land, they build farms right in the path of the elephants. And then the elephants come through and they start eating their crops. So they shoot them. So this is a big problem. And I realized that is due to lack of education and knowing what to do about the elephants. These girls that I was working with, they knew nothing about nature, even though they're in the most beautiful country surrounded by animals, and they didn't know anything about them. They had never left their one spot. We don't realize how destitute the people actually are in many parts of the world. And so my goal now is to start a school right in the middle of the wildlife conflict. It's called the Elephant Matriarch School for mothers and children. So this is an untapped resource. The school will be for these types of girls and their babies who usually are undereducated. And then this is the group that has trouble with the animals. So this is going to become a school based on nature and conservation. And it's right outside of Tsavo National Park, which is the largest park in Africa. And that's where a lot of the animals come through.
Georgia, what's your take, and I'd love to hear from other folks as well, on this notion that we need to respect Mother Nature and definitely have respect for animals, whether they're our own pets, and you did say that you brought your pets with you and everything, but also have a understanding of the other animals that are out there. You definitely said that you consider yourself an animal rights activist. You mentioned some of the things that you've done with zoo animals, and some people will say that, the zoo animals actually lead a good life and that the circus animals lead a good life as well, better than those animals that are in the wild. And I was just wondering your take on that and whether you can hear that argument and what your answer is to folks that will make that statement.
Okay. Zoos are deadly for big animals, especially large animals like elephants. An elephant walks hundreds of miles a day. They have soft pads on their feet. They have herds, families that they stay with their whole lives. They're very social. They're very intelligent. Their brains are much bigger than ours. They've been on the earth longer than we have. They've helped create the forests because everywhere they go, they eat and then they poop, and then the new crops spread up, new trees, and we need them for climate change. It's very painful and stressful, and it's very it's not right to keep an elephant in a cage. An elephant in a cage goes crazy. That's what you see, some of them bobbing their heads. That's a psychological problem. Also, they get arthritis in their feet because they can't walk on the soft earth. And that's how many of them die young in these zoos. And it's not right for humans to try to put them in there like a spectacle when they're a living, breathing creature that we share the earth with, who's been on the earth much longer than humans have. And we don't have a right to just try to enslave them as we do so many animals and use them just for our own benefit.
Definitely, I can hear that thought and everything. If anybody else on the panel, I know that Shaquille has worked with certain things in the animal community, and he may have some thoughts or some of the things that he's done and all in that space. But I'll let Shaquille bring up his.
He loves dogs. He loves dogs.
If we're just gonna walk me into that, Georgia, I own racehorses and racing greyhounds, and I actually work with a lot of animal rights people, because some of the practices that I've observed I think is absolutely deplorable and disgusting. I probably won't agree with you on the positions I think you might take, that things like this should be banned, the sport should be banned altogether. I don't agree. I just read your site. I see that you're a vegan. I don't think that veganism is a solution that we should pursue. That's my personal opinion. But to be perfectly honest, I know that a lot of the panelists here are sort of sitting back to see how I'm going to interact with both yourself and Medea. You know what? I read through your website, and there are some things I think that we're not going to agree on, but I actually agree with most of what you say. I do agree with a lot of the issues that you bring up. And I think that when we deal with issues, whether it be animal rights or whether it be some of the issues I want to bring up with Medea in a few moments, we need to have a balance. And unfortunately, that gets lost. So I was really glad to hear you talking about people in Africa who are mistreating animals because that's their way of surviving. I actually donate to a lot of charities. One of them deals with bears in Indonesia that are sitting in these cages and they're being milked and that sort of thing. They have terrible, traumatic lives. But the animal rights group that is trying to do something about it, I asked them, I said, what are you doing about the people? Because the reason why these people are treating the animals that way is because they're desperate. They don't have any other way of making a living. What are we going to do to deal with that? And they actually didn't have an answer because they were only focused on the bears. So I actually don't have much that I'm going to be, staunchly disagree with you on things. I think there are a few points that we might not perhaps see eye to eye. Very interested to hear you talking about Kenya. I'll be going to Kenya on the 1st of February. I'll be meeting with the president over there. There's a number of things that we need to talk about with him. So perhaps after the show, perhaps we can connect and have a chat about a few things and some of the things that you're trying to do over there in Kenya. For Medea, who I spent a lot more time researching because Mark Lee's probably warned you about me. He says to me, look, we've got somebody who's a Green Party person. She's an animal rights activist, but I think he maybe confused the two people. She's a progressive. Be nice. And I went, oh, God, how am I going to be nice? So then I went and actually looked you up. And I will tell our international audience that your books are available on Amazon. I know because I bought not only all of them, but a couple that I think aren't even in English, but I accidentally just, I was on a buying spree. So they are available. But I also looked you up and I had a read off your bio. And again, I'm not going to agree with everything that you say. No two people are ever going to agree on everything. But I really have to take my hats off to you. You got guts. I mean, what I've read about you going into some of these Middle Eastern countries, getting arrested, standing up for what you believe in, I don't think I'd have the balls to do it. So I honestly, it's a real honor to be on the show with you. I don't really have anything negative to say. And the worst thing actually was I was trying to find something that I could, spin back at you and go, look at this thing that you've said. This is so wrong. And unfortunately, actually, almost everything that you say and stand for, I agree with. There are some minor points of difference, but I agree with them. And I've actually talked about things on recent shows. So you've talked about sweatshops, for example. That's a real issue. I think it's a significant issue that we sit here in Western countries and buy these things from countries that have conditions that we would never allow, but yet we sit there and say, we want unions, we want better pay, we want better healthcare, etc. We demand that for ourselves and then buy goods from people who aren't being paid properly. We should be paying them properly. So, as I said, having read through your website, your bio, I'm a little bit lost because I'm like, I'm not supposed to like this person. We're supposed to really disagree, and I really am struggling to find anything that I disagree with you on. So,
for both Medea and Georgia, the question.
Sorry, the one person that I will say something to is our so-called Republican ex-military man, Lieutenant Colonel Chris Greco. These complaints about the $800 billion that's being spent by the United States. I just want to keep things consistent here. So, yes, America is spending a massive 3.2% of your GDP on the military budget.
Ooh.
Now, I agree that, not being American, I agree that there are some issues in the United States, especially with healthcare when you compare it to other nations. But I just want to remind both yourself and Medea, with all due respect, we can't just live in this sort of fluffy, living on white cloud world with no military conflicts, because that's not the way the world works. And poorer countries that have managed to, unfortunately, be subjected to dictators and despots who have absolutely no care or consideration for my favorite document in the world, the UN Declaration of Human Rights, who have mistreated and abused and been violent towards people that live in their countries. They don't have oftentimes a way to fight back. And our countries, Australia and New Zealand and the UK, the US, obviously, we have to make a choice. When America gets criticized for being the world's police service, we have to make a choice. If we hold these things to be dear to us, if we really believe that human beings have a right not to be oppressed, are we going to turn a blind eye when we see that happening to poorer people in other nations? Or are we, as strong, wealthy nations, going to say, no, that's not acceptable? And I think that more than any other country on earth, the United States has been there, certainly in modern history, has been there to help those countries and those people that have had horrible situations and have been in awful circumstances. And what I would ask people to do is, if they're going to criticize America, who would they prefer to have gone in there to those places? I'm not saying America always got it right, so let's not be too harsh on the United States.
So before all this, I wanted to tell Georgia, first of all, welcome to the show. Welcome to the Billabong here. So I'd like to, to use an Australian term, I'd like to, on my share screen, I do have your website up. So it's, Terriers in the Jungle, which is really actually a neat looking title, a book cover. I've never seen anything where elephants and terriers were both in the same one. So I thought that was very interesting. And also, I wanted to point out the people that are geographically, not as literate. This is the Tsavo National Park, and this is Kenya. So basically, was an area of Kenya that is relatively close, and I can actually tell you how many miles it is. Very close to Somalia, which is only 214 miles from Somalia. So it's relatively close to an area that in Somalia that is unbelievably chaotic. So it's no wonder that a lot of poaching and a lot of things are happening in this area of Kenya, because you have people that are basically starving in Somalia that are probably coming over and trying to either get game or do something that they can take back to their country and actually sell or do whatever they need to do. So I just thought I'd throw those out there.
No, I appreciate that, Chris.
Thank you, Georgia.
Medea and Georgia, one of the things that we brought up on this show before, and I'd love to hear both of your thoughts around this, is
Given
for
that
those
I said
Western
something
nations and everything,
I'd
how
say you
much,
should be allowed to respond to the things that I said, because I
and
did.
I was going to tie in what I'm asking into what you said.
Nobody cares.
And
go
I'm
on.
going to tie it into what you just said. But how much responsibility should the more powerful Western nations have when they are seeing injustices, whether that's on animal rights, as Georgia is talking about, whether that's on civil rights? We've seen this whole discussion going on with some people's views of women's rights that are taking place in Middle Eastern countries, and some folks that want us to intervene in whatever way that intervening is and support those that are fighting against what they feel is an injustice against women or against the LGBTQIA communities in those countries. But I just wondering for both of you what your thoughts are in whether we should even be trying to be more of a global citizen in that sense.
Well, a global citizen would be to adhere to the rule of law and to the United Nations and not intervene without some kind of United Nations stamp on it. And as we were talking about Martin Luther King, at the time of Vietnam, he said that the US was the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. While I totally condemn the Russian aggression, the US continues to be a purveyor of violence in the world. And I have the US involvement in Iraq, a preemptive war that caused so much death and suffering, is a horrific stain on us, and nobody was held accountable. Certainly not George Bush, Dick Cheney, any of the people who got us into that war. The US and NATO overthrow of the government of Libya has left that country in terrible straits. The US has been giving money to Israel that has been violating the rights of Palestinians every single day. I was beat up, arrested, and deported from Egypt, a country that has 60,000 political prisoners and is a dictatorship that the US supplies almost $2 billion a year to. And let's remember that we are selling, the number one purchaser of our weapons has been for a long time Saudi Arabia, which is perhaps the most oppressive dictatorial regime in the world. So let's not pretend that the US is a great supporter of democracy around the world. We have a terrible track record on that, and the US should never unilaterally intervene in other countries.
But who should then? Who should? I actually agree with you. The United States has had its failures, right? But at least the United States tried. And the United States didn't have these failures on their own. Australia has come along in every single conflict that you guys have had since our federation. New Zealand has done the same. The UK has done the same. It's not like America does these things unilaterally, as you just said,
and Canada
by themselves without.
Well, they strong-arm other countries to do it. But Shaquille, when you say at least they tried, I mean, there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. It was none of our business that Iraq had a bad a dictator. There were plenty of other dictators in the world that are.
I beg to differ. The United States was responsible for putting Saddam Hussein there. But the point that I'm trying to make is, I actually agree with you on a lot of the things that you've said. That the United States certainly has made a lot of mistakes politically around the world, and has caused some people in the world to love the US and some people to absolutely hate the US. But my question is, well, we can't live in a world where there's no conflict. We can't live in a world where there's no military. It'd be nice, okay, but the dreamland that John Lennon is in, Imagine, doesn't exist in the real world. So if we're going to criticize the United States because they've gone out there and they've got some things wrong, are there some conflicts the United States got right? Are there some conflicts that America went into that actually resulted in a better outcome for the people? I think that this sort of unrelenting criticism of the United States and the military, when the motivating force behind this was often because they wanted to bring about better peace, they wanted to bring about better human rights, this show, we've just had the comments made about defunding or reducing the funding for the military at the same time as we've heard somebody else say that we should get involved in Middle Eastern affairs because of the LGBTQ community and women's rights. You
Well,
can't
that
have.
doesn't mean militarily. I think what I believe is that the U.S. military should be defending our country, not seeking enemies overseas, as our founding fathers warned us against. And we have been using the military to invade and occupy other countries that we should not be involved in. And I think once this, let's hope that this conflict in Ukraine is settled without taking us into World War III or a nuclear war, it's up to the Europeans to set the kind of security architecture they want for Europe, and it should not be the business of the United States. Our people would be much better off in this country if we stuck to improving the lives of Americans and not searching out conflicts overseas that we have no business being involved in.
That seemed to be the policy of Donald Trump. That's what he said, and he was voted out of office, right? So if you're not going to be in the United States, if you're not going to be the leader of the Five Eyes nations, and you're not going to be the leader of the free world, which one of the other countries do you think should step up to the plate?
I think that's why we have the United Nations. You were just holding up the booklet. The
Absolutely.
You got to be kidding me.
But the United Nations has done so little on so many of these issues. Look, again, I agree with you that prolonged occupations of other countries is problematic. It's costly, it's problematic, and the fact that the United States should spend its money inwards isn't relevant to that part of the equation.
Well,
but no, it's not, because it doesn't really matter. Are you suggesting then that if the United States had more money, that they and poverty and homelessness and healthcare wasn't an issue in the United States, then it would be okay for them to go overseas and militarily intervene? Of course not. But if we're going to start
saying that we have an existential crisis of the climate to deal with.
Well, yeah.
Geez, the climate's going to happen no matter what.
We've heard that before. But let me just come back. I'll leave Clyde alone. Let's just come back to the military intervention section for a minute.
What a bunch of crap.
If somebody is being attacked, if you're just walking down the street and you're a man, I'm 6'1", and I see a woman being attacked, should I go up there and just try to talk the guy out of it? And then when he doesn't stop, just continue to try and talk my way, try and talk him down? Or should I at some point say, what you're doing is wrong, and if you punch that girl, I'm going to punch you harder? That's the difference between diplomacy and military action. And at the end of the day, we can all sit there and be all lovey-dovey about it, but oftentimes diplomacy fails, and when it does, you need a strong military that's prepared to go in and fight for the rights of people. And the United States deserves respect, and the United States has a debt owed to it by the rest of the world that the world is not likely to be able to repay in the near future.
Georgia, just really quickly.
Amen.
And I do want to get to Sasha too, but Georgia, and I just want to give you
Let me respond. Don't make a point.
I'd like to emphasize one thing. There is no such thing as diplomacy without $1 trillion war budget. It just doesn't work. Nobody needs your diplomacy.
I'll agree with you there.
That's kind of my point. That's kind of my point.
Best military in the world, and all that diplomacy is worth, like 75 cents will buy you a cup of coffee with all this.
Well, that's kind of. My
I mean, let's take a look at Lebanon. To springboard off of that, let's take a look at Lebanon. Lebanon was the Paris of the Mideast. It was a beautiful country. 1948 National Geographic. It's just gorgeous. Lebanese. I mean, it was absolutely great. What didn't they have? A military. Guess what they are now? They're destroyed. Look at Switzerland. Switzerland just bought F-35s. They just bought, and you know something? They maintain neutrality. They've never been invaded. You know why they've never been invaded, and why they don't invade other countries is because they have one of the strongest militaries in the world. So they sit back and they go, "You're going to invade us. You're going to pay for that invasion because we have all modern equipment." So they've been able to keep that neutrality throughout all these wars and all these situations because of their ability to maintain that. So I do agree with you on that, Shaquille, is the fact that you have to maintain, I don't think 800 billion, but I think you have to maintain a military to be able to say to people, you're going to invade us, you're going to have a problem. But
Right.
the bottom line is to agree with Medea,
Right.
is it's national defense. Now we go out beyond our borders because we think national defense goes out into these other areas and say, hey, we've got to stop the domino principle. We got to stop, we got to stop them from invading this country, because if they invade this country, then they're going to invade this country. But on the other side of that, and to take the Ukrainians' role in this whole situation, Medea, is this is their country. So they're going to sit back and go, we are going to fight. If U.S. stopped now, if we stopped right now giving anything to Ukraine, nothing. We said, we're not going to give you one penny. We're not going to give you one gun. We're not going to give you one bullet. Guess what would happen? The Ukrainians would fight. They would still fight. They would fight with pitchforks. They'd fight with whatever they could get their hands on. Now, the thing is, so we're not stopping a war. And the military-industrial complex, I know it's doing whatever needs to be done there, but it's going to happen. It happened in Vietnam until we finally pulled out. It happened in Afghanistan until the Soviets pulled out. It happened in Afghanistan until it happened in Afghanistan, British, the whole 9 yards, till everyone pulled out, and now they're right back where they started from.
You briefly got about Vietnam, but correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't the French? Weren't they the ones that went into Vietnam first? Weren't they?
Don't get me started on that, Shaquille.
Let me just ask you a question. Medea, you say that Europe should be more responsive to things happening in the Ukraine. Let me just ask you this, and I'll try not to say anything else, because I think you certainly deserve to have some time to respond to the things that I've said and others have said. If you believe in diplomacy so well, what do you think about the best that the European Union could offer for diplomacy for something that was democratic, which was Brexit? The UK wanted to leave. They had a vote. They wanted to leave. They even said, if we have to leave on hard terms as opposed to having a deal, then we'll do so. What was the best form of European Union diplomacy? Well, what they did was they held over the head of the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland that border, that they would force it closed despite the October Agreement. They basically have threatened the United Kingdom to inflame relationships that have been reasonably peaceful for most of my lifetime, and I'm almost 40, right? That was the thing that they held over the UK. These are the people that I'm supposed to, and everyone else is supposed to entrust, are going to be able to negotiate a nice settlement internationally where conflicts exist. I don't believe it. I don't buy it. Why?
Well-
Hold on a second, Sasha.
I'm going to respond.
No, I was going to let.
Chris, I wanted to add something to what you were saying about the military spending and budget of almost $1 trillion. There is also a very big byproduct of this spending is military industrial complex, which is now thriving, and that will really make America great again. So don't shun on this $1 trillion, because it's all going to U.S., the best in the world military companies, industrial military complex. That creates a lot of jobs. Some of them are working just on Ukrainian orders. They're working 24/7. They're hiring people over and over. And that's what made America, and did have America great again since 1945 until now. And that will continue.
1939, yeah.
It's very sad that you think America is great by spending all this money and creating jobs in an industry that thrives on death and destruction. I believe in defense, but not the offensive way that the U.S. military has been used. And it will be the end of the U.S. empire. You see China having the advantage over the United States, which will grow as years go by, because they are not putting so much of their money into the military, and they are not invading other countries militarily.
Really?
Well, listen, sorry
you're
preparing to invade Taiwan. They're preparing to do exactly that. And China is the most abusive violation of human rights, even in their own country. They will never, ever match United States, whether it's economic and military or cultural or any other aspects at all. And U.S. needs this budget to have a viable diplomacy and conduct all
the
affairs
opposite.
in the
When you
world.
put so
All
much
other
money in the
countries have to
military.
listen very carefully to what America says and follow in its steps. And if that's not happening, America has to strike with all available force. At
Well,
any
folks, this is,
Hey, hold on a second.
Yeah.
I'm going
I'm sorry I
to
got
go
you
a little
later.
bit over and everything, Steve, and everything, but I did want to hear at the end from our two esteemed guests and all in that space. So I'm actually going to start with Georgia, and one of the things I was going to ask, because actually Shaquille kind of alluded to it, because I did not know that you were a vegan, but I was wondering if we should also be getting away from our fur clothes and things of that nature. But I would love to hear your final closing thoughts, and I know that you're going to be on one of my shows later on as well, and I don't know that Shaquille has made an overture to you because of his meeting with the Kenyan president later as well. But if you wanted to share some of your observations and thoughts around climate and animal causes and things of that nature, and then I definitely want to give Medea a chance to give some closing remarks as well, and then Steve always closes us out, so we may go over about 5 or 10 minutes. So Georgia, I'm giving it to you.
Oh, thank you. Well, you know, I love, first of all, Medea, I'm very honored to meet you. I was a member of your group for a long time. I've worked on women's rights, peace rights, anti-nuclear in the past until I became involved with animals. And I've been, for the last 20 years, focusing on animal rights more than world rights or women's rights, because I found it to be something that I feel very deeply about, and that is often overlooked. You know, when we go into these conflicts and so on, nobody ever thinks about the animals. Look at all these poor animals in the Ukraine who are stranded there, and all these people are trying to help them, which is very good, but they're the last to be considered. And when we think of ourselves as a global community, we're trying to have peace with each other, but I don't think we can ever have peace with each other as long as we keep slaughtering animals and taking cruelty towards animals, using them for our own good. It's all part of the same problem, really. I'm not an expert on world politics today. I focused on mostly African wildlife, and this is how I feel. And I think that climate change has to do with it too. I mean, climate change, I mean, I'm a vegan because I love animals, but it's also good for the climate. And all the destructive things that we're doing are destroying the climate and eventually destroying ourselves. All these weapons and all the flights of military planes and everything, they're filled with pollution and destruction. And is this what we want to do for ourselves? Is this the kind of world that we really want? That who's going to beat who? I mean, we have to think of it in a different way. We have to think of it, how can I make my world better? And when we look at other people, now what are they going to do for us? But how can we help them? You know, I mean, it's just a whole different mindset, really. And it's not who's got the most guns. It's, you know, what's going on? How can, these are people too, just because we're very fortunate that we live in wealthy countries. We've had privileges that most of the world has never known. And is it our place to just keep dominating everything? No, I don't think so. So that's
Georgia, can I ask you a quick question here? You've talked about climate change here, and it's just something that I don't understand. I really don't. And just so you know, I'm the president of the International Green Alliance. Animal rights is a really important thing, and the way that animals are mistreated, especially in poorer parts of the world, is a really serious issue. Why do we want to bring climate change into this? I know very many people that care deeply about animals that have questions about the climate change stuff that's being discussed. The Sierra Club does this all the time. They're supposed to be an environmental organization, and then they start promoting things that have nothing to do with the environment. Do you think that we should just leave climate change alone and let's just focus on the animals if that's really what you're passionate about?
No, well, it's all connected. You know, the the world is our habitat. It's the habitat. It's where we live. It's where the animals live. You know,
That's-
I'm going to have to leave.
Eventually,
So
another
I
climate
want to
change
wish
issue.
everyone a great evening. I had a technology situation where I got hacked, and so I've lost 12 years of data, and so I may be gone for a few days trying to recover all of my information. So
That might be the Republicans, Dave, in Washington
yeah,
D.C.
I mean,
They've
it's really
had you.
scary.
Oh,
But I apologize.
I
So
did
I'm
it,
gonna be gone
Steve.
for
I
a
did
few
it.
days, but wanted to thank you all for being with us, and hopefully,
Steve Medea, we were giving Medea a chance.
Yeah, we're
to-
going to do
Oh, and
that.
Medea, you close out, and I'll
Steve,
see you
good to
guys
see you.
on Friday or next week. Thank you.
Well, I just found myself agreeing with everything that Georgia said. It's kind of interesting that the two women in this group are the ones that want to take care of the planet and the people and the species that are going extinct and want people to get along with each other and not kill each other. And Dan, you put in the chat, are you a hater? I'm not a hater at all. In fact, I'm a lover, and I love the planet. I love the animals. I love the people. And I
But
just
Medea,
get
Medea,
along.
which one of us guys is the opposite to that? Which one of us guys
Dan.
has said we want to kill
Dan
the planet?
is that.
We want to
He's
Well,
we
been
actually, I'm not.
live in
You
peace.
been
mislead
saying
me.
that we're haters. He's been saying I don't serve my country because I didn't go into the military, and he's been saying that
No,
that
you don't have any context for what you're saying.
So I'm
You're
just saying
naive. That's what I'm saying is you're
yes,
naive.
you're,
You don't have
you
any
call me
context for
naive,
anything you're
but
saying.
I think that Georgia and I represent the future of the planet because
Oh God!
You know,
You
Oh,
can't
please
possibly
leave
believe
that to somebody
believe
else to judge what
if you
future
don't
is
take
going to
our
be.
advice and start treating people and finding ways to resolve conflicts peacefully and start saving this planet instead of allowing a nuclear war or the extinction of millions of more species on
wants
this
a
planet.
nuclear
We
We've
war?
won't
heard
have
this
planet.
message for the last 70 years.
And,
There's nothing new what you are now bringing to
and
the
just
table.
as
It's been
Georgia-
all around. We all know that the conflicts are and will be there forever. That's a part of human nature. And you
that's a
cannot
very-
go against human nature. It's just impossible to do, period.
There's now a treaty at the United Nations to ban.
Forget about United Nations. It's an
I think
impotent,
as we go
Sasha,
forward,
absolutely impotent
Sasha,
organization
Sasha.
that should be dismantled. So
Sasha,
don't
let
have to
Medea-
promote it.
Sasha,
Sasha.
let Medea have let her have
let me
her.
just
have
end on a positive note.
Okay,
which is
I had enough.
She's been passionate
enjoyed
enough
the
that
last
she's
hour.
she got herself arrested in Middle Eastern countries. She's passionate enough that she stood up her entire life for the issues that she believes and agrees with. I don't agree with everything that she said, but I think that she certainly deserves for us to give her audience and for us to hear what she has to say as we close out.
Well, let me just say that I've actually enjoyed this hour. It's not often that we get to have these kind of heated discussions with people that we don't agree with, but I want us to end on a positive note, which is that we do have to find ways to live together peacefully, that this is an age of nuclear weapons that we have to get beyond. And it is an age of extinction of millions of species on this planet. We have to do something about it. I work with young people every day, and I find that their enthusiasm is about doing something to make this planet a better place. And let's support them in their efforts. Let's support everybody who's trying to do something good to make the planet one where Martin Luther King would have been proud of us, saying that we're trying to eradicate the issues of poverty, of racism, of military, and let's add into that the climate crisis. Thank you.
Appreciate it. That was a great closeout. Lee, we never heard from you. I don't know if you've got any last thoughts that you wanted to give as well, because you're the only person that I never heard from.
No, I was just enjoying it and learning from everybody to talk. I just think it's commendable. I put it in the notes over there. When people have positions and they actually act on them and just don't leave it for others to do, for both of our guests, they just get out there and trying to make the world a better place.
Yeah, no doubt. And I'm definitely one of those folks that admires folks that are willing to take their message to the world. And I've seen that both with Medea and Georgia, that they are definitely willing to take that message to the world and share their insights to the global community. And on behalf of everybody here, I hope that both of you will make a return trip, because we definitely love having these kind of conversations. I would love to see both of you back again.
Thank you.
On that note,